Well, I'm excited to be here. I had the opportunity to work at the Africa Center when this program began, and I think it's one of the most important things that the Africa Center does, and as we talk, I'll tell you why I believe that, and I think it's proved its worth. But the first thing I want to do is congratulate you for being here. The fact that you were chosen to come here by your country means a lot. And I'm sincere in saying that that deserves congratulations. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. So let's begin with that. This is my overall theme. And if you want to take a nap, if you'll just write this down on your page, then you can take a nap. But the most important thing I want to relay to you is that you can make a difference. You have the skills, you have the background, and if you put that charge in your mind, you can make a difference. I just met with General Aguirre a few minutes ago, and he's a long and trusted friend, and I understand he talked with you yesterday. He knows firsthand some of the challenges that you're going to face as military leaders, and I do too, in a different context. So I hope that what General Aguirre told you yesterday and what I will tell you today will come together to help you sincerely believe that you can make a difference. And that's the purpose of this presentation. So, the first question I have in my presentation is, why are you here? You probably asked yourself that as you were flying that long flight from wherever you came, or sitting in the airport in Amsterdam or Paris or London or somewhere waiting for a connecting flight. You probably ask yourself, why am I going to the United States of America for the Next Generation course? And I want to answer that question from three perspectives. Why did your country send you? First of all, you have a reputation. You have worked in your country. You have served your country in the security sector. And someone in the leadership position there said, this individual has promise to operate on a strategic level and support our nation's. And so they selected. There we are. The congratulations part is that indeed someone in leadership of your country has identified you as having the potential to grow and take on an even larger role and responsibility in your nation. So that's probably the number one reason why you're here from your country's perspective, is they want you to develop into the kind of leader that can make a difference. The second thing that it shows is that your country trusts you. And trust is an important factor in military service. Your leaders, the citizens of your country, they have demonstrated a trust in your capacity and a hope that you will one day lead your country to be stronger, to be safer, and to be a better place for them to raise their children. So I think that's why your country sent you here. All right? The next question then is one of a personal nature. Why did I come? Did you come because you wanted to travel? You wanted to shop? You wanted to see someplace new and different? You wanted to meet friends that you've never met before? Probably all of that. When we first started this course, one of my requirements, and the dean will remember this, is that we sent you all to a baseball game. Because we wanted you to understand what Americans, why they supported this crazy, foolish sports activity. Well, you can watch that on television now, but it's too cold to go to a baseball game this time of year. We'll have to reinvent this program a little warmer so you can go down and see that. But there are all kinds of experiences that you will have here that will help you understand better who Americans are, what our intentions are, and then you can make the judgment as to whether some of these traits, goals, ambitions are worthy and can be applied in your nation or not. I believe that most of you came here because you want to learn. You want to be a leader in your country. And you see this as an opportunity for you to learn, and that's why you came. The third part of this question is, what does the Africa Center for Strategic Studies want to accomplish? Why do they want you here? What are they attempting to do? And the first thing is a negative. They're not here to teach or lecture. Most of the faculty on the Africa Center staff have studied Africa, have visited Africa many times. Some have roots in Africa. But you live there. You have daily experiences there. You experience the challenges firsthand, and it would be absurd for academicians in Washington, D.C. to try to lecture you on the challenges of Africa. So ACSS is not going to do that. What they will do, with your help and full participation, and that's important that you participate, is that they will make you think, they will challenge you, and they will inspire you. And if they accomplish those goals, they've done what they wanted to do. The goal of ACSS is to help Africa, each of your countries, to become a more stable, more prosperous environment, and instill in each of you a firm belief that you can make a difference for good. And our hope is that we can help you develop a commitment that you can be a force for change in your country. Lastly, ACSS has learned through the years of teaching this course that the greatest learning will come from each other. The opportunity to sit down and share with your peers who have similar responsibilities and similar challenges across the continent will be the major learning experience of this course. So I urge you to take advantage of that in every way that you can. Learn from each other. Okay, so that answers the first question of why you're here. The next question is, okay, who am I? David gave me a glowing introduction, and I appreciate that. He's always very kind in that regard. I'm a retired Marine. I spent 40 years as a Marine in the United States military. I've traveled all over the world, been to 136 countries in the world, been to 46 countries on your continent. So I haven't been to them all. I have an ambition to do that one day, but there's still a couple I haven't visited, but I've been to 46. I worked at the Africa Center for several years, and I represented the U.S. government in small ways in negotiations to end conflict in the Sudan, Burundi, and Cote d'Ivoire. Now, I'm just an old man. I love the tradition in Africa of how you respect your elders and the story of the baobab tree. I had this vision of being a wise old man sitting under the baobab tree and having people come ask my opinion on things here in the U.S. It ran into some problems. First of all, I couldn't find a baobab tree here. Second of all, I wasn't really that wise and didn't have any wise knowledge to impart. And third, nobody cared what I had to say anyway. So that ambition of being an old man sitting under the wise old man sitting under the baobab tree has gone away. But I do have this great picture that ACSS gave me when I left here that I framed of this baobab tree. And whenever I look at that, I reconstitute that dream that someday maybe I'll find one. But since that didn't work out, I have the opportunity to do things like this today. And you're very polite, and you'll sit here and listen to what I have to say. And I want you to know that I'm excited to be here, and I say that in all honesty. We started this course about 10 years ago. We felt that at the Africa Center that if we could reach out to that group of leaders in Africa who were wise enough and experienced enough to see what was going on, but also had the opportunity to move to that next level, and if we could help you develop that confidence in your own abilities and set the goals for what you wanted to accomplish, then it would be a worthwhile endeavor. And I think it's been successful. There have been several hundred graduates of this course over these 10 years. They have returned home, and many of them have assumed leadership positions in your armed forces. You will join their ranks when you finish this course, and I'm convinced that you too will make a difference. The last part of this slide is Fulford's vision for Africa. I'm not an African. I've been there many times. I have many friends. I love Africa. And so I sat down and wrote what I believe is my vision of the Africa continent. And I did this several years ago, and I've refreshed it a time or two, but generally the vision stays about the same. Now, I don't know if I've got it right. You live there. It's more important to you than it is to me. But what I would ask you to do in the next few days while you're here, and you have a few minutes, is to sit down and write your vision for Africa. Either the continent as a whole or your individual country. What would you like to see your country be like? What would be your vision? So that's your homework number one from me, is to take a few minutes and write this down. And then secondly, as you go through the course, continually ask yourself, how can I do things that will help bring about this vision? That's my challenge also. Okay, I'm going to talk about three challenges here as we begin this discussion. And I want to first say that I'm not an expert in any of them. So that's when you get to be an old man, you can talk about things that you're not an expert in, and people will forgive you sometimes. So I'm not an expert in any of the three of these, but I do believe that you take all the challenges of Africa and you condense them into these three things and put them in that kind of a compartment or bucket. It helps me to think them through. None of the nations in the world, whether it be Africa, the United States, China, or anybody else, can succeed without these three components. So you've got to have them. Any one of those, the absence of any one of those is going to lead to instability and turmoil. So that's one of the reasons I focused as I did. And I will talk about all three, but I will remind you the first two, I'm far from an expert, so I will be very quick on going through those. Talk about governance first. Governance, in my definition, is the manner in which nations lead their citizens for the common good. When our framers of the Declaration of the United States almost 240 years ago came together to write that declaration, here's what they said. We come together to rid ourselves of tyranny and to form a more perfect union. Africans certainly know about tyranny from outsiders and from brutal dictators internally. So ridding yourself of tyranny is a concept that you are well aware of. Many Africans have also labored to form a more perfect union, yet problems persist. We in the United States have not formed a perfect union. We have our problems, as does the United Kingdom, France, China, India, countries around the world, all have internal problems. But the important thing, and what the framers of our Constitution were saying, is we've got to keep trying. We've got to make this country better than it is today. It probably will never be perfect, but it's got to be better, and the way it's going to be better is that we're going to work to make it that way. In Africa, I believe that corruption is your number one problem facing governance. No nation is free of this problem, to include the United States, unfortunately. And all nations in Africa are not plagued with corruption, but many are. And if you come from one of those, you know it well. Transparency International, the United Nations, and other NGO organizations routinely place several African countries at the very bottom of a list of nations around the world with regard to corruption. This normally starts with the political and business sectors as individuals seek more wealth and power. In many cases, it spills over into military organizations as political leaders embrace their military leaders, seeking their support and protection. Unfortunately, military leaders sometimes succumb to that corrupt practice, taking money, taking position, seeking wealth and power. I offer these two thoughts with regard to governance. First of all, Africa must rein in this concept of corruption in your government if you're ever going to succeed. Your citizens must trust their government, and you can't trust a government that's corrupt. And so I believe that's task number one. Task number two comes from personal experience traveling in Africa and hearing people talk about this. They talk about an acceptable level of corruption. What is the acceptable level of corruption for my country? And my belief is there's no such thing. especially for leaders in the security sector. There is no such thing as an acceptable level of corruption. You need to be pure, you need to be honest, you need to be forthright, and you need to guard your character and your reputation very carefully. The fact that I hear this comment made by many of the leaders in Africa across the continent is a sad commentary on the governance there today. The fact that there is belief that there is an acceptable level of corruption. I know some of you are frustrated with the failure of your leaders in the past to bring about good governance in your countries, and you're looking for opportunities to change that poor governance of the past. There are peaceful, rule of law ways to do that, and that I am confident that good leaders, using the right motivations, can overcome this mentality of corruption on the African continent. I want to switch to the second challenge of economic opportunity. Demographics in Africa make this challenge very, very great. You already have a large youth bubble in many of your countries where you've got a majority of your population that are young, some uneducated, some without jobs, and they're creating difficulty in your societies. That's going to get worse. People tell us that over the next 2 decades, most of the growth in the world's population will come in Africa, and the growth of that population will be significant. A growing population with large youth groups added to the existing problems you already have is going to be a huge challenge. Water resources, food production, many of the necessities of life, the environment, the impact on the environment, are all going to be impacted by this growing population on the African continent. But the good news is that Africa has abundant resources. If you harness and use these resources properly for the benefit of all, and not just a few, these resources will prove sufficient to meet the needs of Africa and its economic development as you go forward. I think this brings about hope, and you've got to sustain that hope, especially among your youth. If your youth give up, if they think that they're not going to ever prosper, they're not ever going to be able to hold a job, then they're going to turn towards violent extremism as a way to carry out their activities. If you have hope that there is a better tomorrow, and that if they work hard and do as they need to do, then they will be able to provide an education for their children and a better life for their families, then this economic opportunity that we talk about will succeed. I also believe that in this area, Africa cannot and should not meet these challenges alone. Through the United Nations or through other bilateral programs such as the Millennial Challenge, that's part of the U.S. program for assisting Africa, I believe that nations around the world must pitch in to help. And this is not charity. It is a moral obligation, and it is necessary for the future well-being of the international order. Finally, we get to security, what you came for. This is my definition of security. I'll let you take a second and read it. Note that it includes physical as well as human security. It includes not only military concerns, but immigration, police, farmers, and just about everyone in your country. Security is a national challenge, and everyone in your country has a role in that. I also believe that the security of the nation is the most important responsibility of your leaders because it impacts and affects everyone in your society. This final budget bullet I want to focus on a little bit and get you to think about because some of you have experienced this. Security, your responsibility and your allegiance is to your nation, not to a regime. The oath that the U.S. military officers take is to the Constitution of the United States of America, not to the president or not to any political leader. Our president is our commander-in-chief, and that's the case in most of your nations. But he gets his authority from the Constitution, not from his personality, his position, or his political party. Too many times in several of your countries, leaders expect their military to protect them and ensure that they can maintain power and influence. If that protection and support is according to your Constitution, then it's proper. But if it is outside your Constitution, then it is improper, and you as military leaders should not be engaged in that form of regime protection. How to manage that issue is not always clear, and it's not always easy. But it is very important that you understand the difference between national security and regime security, and as security as professionals, you act in the proper way. You're at the stage in your professional career where you're soon to be called on to make a transition from the tactical and operational level to the strategic level. You've been leading platoons and companies and battalions and operations across the continent and in peacekeeping operations around the world. You know how to do those things. But at your stage in your career, about to move to that strategic level, you need to broaden your horizons. The decisions you make, the influence that you have, will be those kinds of influences that will establish the future of your nation and the well-being of your people. Think about the difference. Tactical and operational is military primarily in support of orders from higher level. Strategic is national, done in cooperation with national leaders, and focused on those decisions that are going to make a difference in your nation. And you need to prepare yourself for that strategic level. Civil-military relations are always important to military officers. Most of you have experience dealing with civilian masters. The higher you go in your profession, however, the more responsible you become, the more important these civil-military relations will be, and the more frequent they will be. Sometimes that can be frustrating because many times These civilian leaders don't understand the job or the challenge or what they're asking you to do. I know in many of your countries, legislators and parliamentarians are more and more getting involved in the security sector oversight of your nations. And that can be a challenge for military professionals. How do you deal with this? I had the privilege in my career of working with some great civilian leaders that I highly respected and that I believed did the best thing for this nation. I also had the opportunity to work for some real losers. How you deal with civilians can be very difficult. Nonetheless, in my case and in yours, there should never be a question about authority. It never was, never is, never will be an answer is of right or wrong or who has the best idea. It's a question of in whose hand the Constitution places authority to make the final decision. And in most cases, that's the civil authority that you're responsible to. You do your best to educate. You do your best to make your case factually, completely, and as boldly as you possibly can. But when the civilian authority makes his or her decision, you salute and you carry out that decision, or in those cases where your own conscience will not allow you to carry out that decision, then you resign your commission. That's a drastic choice, not something to be done lightly over small things, not something to be done quickly without thinking through the ramifications. But sometimes it's the right choice to make. The more senior you become, the more responsibilities you hold, the more challenges you will face with your ethical values. You will be asked to take shortcuts. You will be asked to look the other way. You will be asked to support decisions that you know are wrong or based on misleading facts. You must weigh these challenges and stand by the values that are important to you. Your character and your reputation are vital to you. Your contribution to your country depends on the value of your character. Always guard that carefully. Don't make quick decisions based on opportunity for money or promotion that's going to ruin a lifetime of service. These are my priority list or suggested priority list of ethical values. These are the values that I developed or I valued this priority list over time and tried to make sure that I as an individual could live up to these values. But more importantly, they were also the values that I told my subordinates I expected them to live up to. And I held them accountable. Now, you may not agree with them, and that's okay. You may have different values that are important to you, or you may want to reorder the priority, and that's okay too. But I do encourage you to establish your own priority list. Once you have your list, use it to improve your own ethical character, to measure your own performance, but also measure the performance of your subordinates that you lead. Such a list will come in handy for you as you face those ethical challenges that you are bound to face as you go forward in your career. I don't intend to discuss each of these now. Your moderators will do this, I'm sure, in your smaller sessions. Or if you have questions or concepts that you'd like to discuss in the question and answer, I'll be happy to do that. I'll just leave them with you, along with the challenge of developing your own list of ethical values. I could not end our discussion without mentioning this issue. When I travel to many of your countries and meet with some of your leaders, I frequently get asked the question of, how do I control my military? How do I ensure that they stay in the barracks when they're supposed to? How can I trust them to do what I tell them to do? I don't want them involved in political activities. I don't want them to abuse the various citizens that they're sworn to protect. I hear this in many countries in Africa, and they're valid concerns. Many of your countries have adopted codes of conduct for your military, and I salute that. That's generally good. And soldiers should understand expectations for wearing that uniform and how they should serve the nation and not take advantage of the nation. But I always respond to these leaders by asking if the country is fulfilling its responsibility towards its military. Is there a code of responsibility in your country on how the nation treats its military? I have written such a code for several of your countries, and at least one that I know of have instituted into law, and that's good. A nation should be responsible for its military, should recruit fairly and openly, should retain and promote based on merit, not based on who you know or how much money you're willing to pay. A nation should pay its soldiers properly. I've talked to soldiers who were conducting roadblocks and collecting money from people traveling on roads and say, why do you do this? And typically the answer I get is, my country has not paid me in 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, and I need this in order to feed my family. That's wrong. A nation has a responsibility to pay its soldiers appropriately if they want the soldiers to devote their lives to the service of their nation. They need to take care of the physical and health relationships of the military and for their families. And most importantly, a country should never ask its military to take any action that violates its own constitution or its rule of law. So keep that in mind. If your nation is asking you to do something that you know violates your own constitution or your own set of laws, then that is not right. African nations, like the United States and many other countries around the world, should give more thought to its responsibilities toward those men and women who devote their lives to serve and protect its citizens. And this is my last thought, and the most important, the one we started with and I told you to write down and remember. You can make a difference. Most of you will be provided opportunities to lead and to make decisions that will impact the well-being of your nation and serve the thousands of citizens that make up your countries. Believe in yourselves. Put away that self-doubt. The fact that you're here means that others have seen you, observed you, and recognize that you have the capacity to lead. Believe in yourself. Once you believe in yourself, then do the right thing. Be a force for change. for good, you can make a difference. Thank you, David.